Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome to our fourth live. So this is lesson number 4, where we are going to explore the topic of happy hormones and specifically the role they play in combating stress hormones, all with the intention of enabling greater resilience. So while we're just waiting for others to arrive, just to reiterate again for those of us joining for the first time, hi Jay, hi Deborah, hello Mary, nice to see you. So yes, we all know the deal. We've all been told to stay home, only go out if we absolutely need to, stay 2 meters away from other people. And as a result, the regular social activities that perhaps we've relied on in the past to keep us in positive mental well-being are no longer available to us. So we've had to adapt very quickly to a whole new way of living, working and being. And this inevitably would have had an impact on our general mental well-being and in effect our emotional and also our physical actually resilience. And when our resilience is low, our ability to maintain our motivation and our focus, and in effect our ability to survive adversity, and let's be honest, we're all in a situation of adversity at the moment, can become compromised. So that's the reason why this group exists. Hello Deborah, nice to see you. You need happy hormones, you're in the right place. Good evening Caddy, nice to have you here. So one of the most empowering ways, if you like, of doing this is understanding not only stress, which hopefully you all have a greater understanding of now as a result of the first 3 lives, but also understanding what we can do specifically to alleviate negative stress. And we talked last week about the difference between positive and negative stress, and to equip ourselves with more of what we need to enable us to both cope and deal with stress better, because stress is a fact of life, as we know. And that's what we're going to be exploring a little bit more tonight. Hi Louise, hello Anna. Oh Anna, it's nice to have you back. So we're going to explore that a bit tonight. So before we proceed, I'm going to ask you, as always, and I always ask you this, to share something that's been good in the chat box. And for those of you that have been on previous lives, you'll understand exactly why that is, why I ask you to do that. I'm not going to go into that in a lot of detail, but if it's new to you, then feel free to go and have a look at lives 1 and 2, where we explain that in quite a lot of detail. I'm just removing my cat for the moment because she's decided she wants a cuddle as soon as I start talking. So it doesn't need to be something big. It can be anything at all. And in fact, quite often it's the small things that make the biggest difference. Hello, Chaz. Nice to have you here. Poor Chaz. I haven't managed to speak to him personally, but at least you're getting to see me here and I'm getting to see you. So thank you for tuning in. So while you're doing that, sharing your what's been good, so do share them because it does help us all get some happy hormones going. I'll share mine. So I'm Director of Culture and Associates at Mental Health in the Workplace, and what's been good for me is that today I returned for the first time in 2 months to the headquarters of a company called Nursline Healthcare, with whom I've been working as Director of Culture for 5 years, and I got to see some of my colleagues in person for the first time in 2 months. Now, although the office has been adapted to ensure social distancing and hugging, therefore, was completely out of the question, I did get to sit in the same room, albeit at a distance, with people who I really enjoy spending time with, who I really respect, and have some conversations and make some plans that were significantly, actually, more progressive than what we've been doing in a remote state for some weeks. And the result of that is that when I drove home this afternoon, I felt completely energized in a way that I just haven't done for some time. And my level of focus and my productivity this afternoon as a result of that has been noticeably greater. So what's interesting about that is that it's the perfect demonstration of what we're talking about tonight. And that's the benefit on our mental health and our well-being, and in effect our cognitive, emotional, physical and behavioural well-being, and you'll remember that from last week, of actively inducing certain neurotransmitters, so more commonly known as happy hormones, in our brains to intentionally improve both our state of mind and how we feel, both of which enable us to perform much, much better, because when that's happening, we can perform closer to our optimum, if not at our optimum. So share your what's been good with us. Let's get rid of this little announcement that's turned up on my screen. You've got the 3-seater garden swing set up. Brilliant. You feel like a pensioner. Hi, Rebecca. Nice to see you. The hedgehog visited my garden. Oh, I do like the pictures of your hedgehog, Deb. So while you're sharing your what's been good, you'll recall me talking 2 weeks ago in live lesson 2 about the 2 parts of the human brain that play a really important role in keeping us A, alive, and that's the primitive brain, and B, enabling us to thrive, and that's the intellectual brain. And I explained that when we're operating from the intellectual brain, which sits here at the front of our skull in the prefrontal cortex, we generally get things right in life, and that when we operate from our primitive brain, whilst it's designed to keep us safe, we generally tend to sit in a focus or a mindset of survival, and it's not about thriving or being the best version of ourselves. And then last week in lesson 3, I shared the process of how stress is created when we looked at the brain in a bit more detail, and we also explored the concept of our metaphorical stress bucket and the importance of emptying it. So I really hope that you found the MP3 recording that I linked you to in that thread with that live on it helpful, and I'm interested to know who of you actually gave that a go as well, because it really does make a significant difference listening to a recording that enables us to replicate REM, which is the part of our sleep that processes our stress. So we talked quite a lot about the importance of not filling our stress bucket up so much in the first place, because whilst emptying it makes a big difference, there's no question about that, the combination of emptying it and not filling it up so much in the first place ensures that we start to get rid of any backlog, and that enables us to lower the stress bucket level on a much more permanent basis. And let's remember that when our stress bucket is low, it doesn't matter what gets thrown at us during the day, because we have the capacity to deal with it from the intellectual part of our brain, where we have access to all of our resources. So tonight we're going to look at how do we stop filling it up so much in the first place. And this is where I get to introduce you to our dose model. And dose stands for dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And this is the quartet of happy hormones that work together to combat cortisol. And it's the subject of tonight's live. So in order for us to keep our stress buckets at a much more manageable level, it helps us to keep ourselves dosed up with this cocktail of happy hormones. But before I go on, what is a happy hormone? So a happy hormone is quite simply a hormone, or in some cases technically a neurotransmitter, but neurotransmitter doesn't quite go, it's not quite as sexy as saying happy hormone. Its main job is to make us feel good. And the validity of happy hormones goes back to primitive times, although the reality is we didn't really know about them back then. Neuroscientists are very adamant that early man and early woman were given very definite rewards for carrying out certain processes, so they're evolutionary processes, if you like. They got rewarded when they went out hunting. They got rewarded when they gathered food, and they got rewarded when they successfully supported themselves and their families. They also got rewarded when they interacted and collaborated with others. And those rewards included feeling motivated and empowered, strong, but most of all was that they coped better with day-to-day feelings and activities like fear and physical actions. It made them more positive. It made them braver, and it enabled them to do whatever was necessary to survive. And it even helped them cope with physical pain. Now, these days, we now know what that reward is, and it's a chemical response in the brain that produces these neurotransmitters, so here we refer to them as happy hormones, that essentially act as catalysts for this sort of mentally healthy behaviour. And today, things are no different. Whilst we no longer have to go out and hunt, we do still need to operate within these positive parameters, just like early man. And this is where understanding our dose model works or helps. So what does this dose cocktail involve? So like I said, there are 4 main hormones that we're going to talk about tonight. that essentially create positive feelings, and they are dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And they are responsible together for our level of happiness. And when we have a very healthy level of these hormones in our body, we feel much better than when we don't. Now, many situations will trigger and can trigger these hormones very naturally, and there are many ways as well that we can trigger them very intentionally. So I'm going to start by just sharing what the 4 hormones are specifically and what they actually do to help us keep feeling more positive. And then next week in our last live, which is live lesson number 5, I'm going to share with you specific ways in which we can intentionally trigger them, so induce them to create more positive feelings. So let's start with D. So D stands for dopamine. And so that you can remember it, it also stands for drive. And there are 2 main things that we need to remember about dopamine. The first one is that dopamine literally drives our brain's reward system. So it's dopamine that urges us to seek pleasure. And it's dopamine that motivates us to achieve goals. It also regulates our emotional responses. So dopamine enables us to not only identify where rewards might be in our lives, but also it gives us the drive to take action to move towards the rewards. Now, most types of reward will increase the level of dopamine in our brain, which is why when we receive any kind of recognition or praise, we get a direct dopamine hit. And when we get a dopamine hit, it makes us feel good. Now, a lack of dopamine, because sometimes it's easier to recognize these hormones when we recognize what happens when we don't have them, a lack of dopamine can result in lack of enthusiasm or motivation and things like self-doubt and procrastination. Okay, so that is the job of dopamine, is it gives us drive and motivation. And when I was talking about my what's been good earlier on, and I was talking about driving home this afternoon feeling really energized and motivated, that was as a direct result of a number of significant things that were decided and acted upon today with my colleagues that gave me that feeling of reward. And actually when I got home, back to my home office now, I was able to apply that really quickly and was so productive this afternoon. So that's dopamine. So let's look at oxytocin. So O stands for oxytocin, and so that you can remember it, it also stands for oneness. And the 2 things to remember about oxytocin is firstly that it's also referred to as the love hormone or the hug hormone. And that's because it makes us feel connected and loved. So it plays a really important role in empathy and in intimacy and in trust. Oxytocin also regulates our social interactions. So it's oxytocin that enables us to both build and maintain healthy relationships. And you'll remember from, I think it was live lesson 1, we talked about mental health and the importance of satisfying personal relationships. And in fact, satisfying personal relationships is one of the areas of our lives that when we have them, it's an indication that our mental well-being is more positive. And when we don't have them or our relationships are suffering, it can be an indication that our mental health has become compromised. Now, most type of connection with other people or other beings will increase the level of oxytocin in the brain, which is why when we hug a loved one or a friend or a colleague, that feeling that we get is oxytocin. And oxytocin makes us feel good, which is why it's a happy hormone. Now, again, the way that we can recognize what's positive when we've got lots of oxytocin is to recognize what happens when we don't have a lot of it. And a lack of oxytocin can result in isolating behavior. Feelings of loneliness will arise when we don't have enough oxytocin. Enhanced fear, and often fear without genuine kind of cause, if you like. And also that feeling of paranoia, perhaps, or distrust. Okay, so that's a direct signal, if you like, sign that our oxytocin levels are low. Now, the beauty of oxytocin is it isn't necessarily limited to human interaction. So if you've got a pet, that feeling that you have when you spend time with your pet, or walk your pet, or stroke your pet, that's oxytocin. So I have, people often laugh at this, but I have not just one cat, but 2 cats, because then I'm guaranteed as much oxytocin as possible. So that's O. So let's have a little look at serotonin. Okay, so serotonin, so that you can remember it, also stands for stability. And none of these hormones are more important than any others, but I think serotonin is the one that kind of has its most far-reaching benefits. And the things to remember about serotonin is firstly that it regulates anxiety. Serotonin regulates sleep. It regulates appetite, and it regulates digestion. Serotonin helps us to maintain mood balance. It makes us feel calmer and clearer as well. So we have much more clarity and emotionally settled. Okay, so that feeling of stability and balance comes from serotonin. It also plays a really important role in social behavior. So serotonin makes us feel and act more amiably and more sociably as well. And we now know the importance of healthy relationships. So it's really key to that. And then the second thing about serotonin is it also regulates our memory, and it regulates learning as well. So when we have ample levels or healthy levels of serotonin, it enables us to be more focused and to retain and also recall information. So a healthy mind and body increases the level of serotonin in the brain, which is why any kind of self-care is so good for us. So for instance, when we get not just enough sleep, but quality sleep and quality duration of sleep as well. When we eat well, so when we eat whole foods, and in other words, foods that are as close to their natural state as possible. When we move our body, and our body was designed to move, when we engage in any intentional relaxation, so anything at all that we do with the sole intention of helping our body or our brain relax, anything at all that is designed to look after ourselves, it creates serotonin. And when we have serotonin in our system, we feel good, and we certainly feel a lot better than when we don't. Now, a lack of serotonin can result, and well, it can actually cause anxiety. It can result in irritability. It can result in insomnia. It can create or result in increased feelings of pain or panic or depression. And in fact, depression is directly linked to low levels of serotonin. A lack of serotonin can also result in memory loss, and it can create difficulty focusing and concentrating. So if you remember last week when we talked about the symptoms of stress, and we talked about cognitive, emotional, physical and behavioural symptoms, a lot of those symptoms can be linked to low levels of serotonin. Serotonin is a really, really important one because it just kind of feeds our entire body and system. And then E in our dose model stands for endorphins. And so that you can remember it, it also stands for ease. And there are in excess of 20 endorphins. I'm getting lots of serotonin here from, this is Mumbai, my cat. Lovely hit of serotonin there, on oxytocin. So we've got 20 endorphins that our brain produces, and it helps us to maintain general physical and psychological wellness. And the things for us to remember is that endorphins regulate, okay? Endorphins regulate all of our emotional responses, and they do that by interacting with the opiate receptors in our brain. So that's our natural painkillers. And by doing that, they enable us to cope with stress and also anxiety. The second thing is that they also regulate physiological responses by continuing to interact with our opiate receptors. So it also helps us to cope with physical pain and also ailments as well. So some of the things that will generate endorphins are things like, and this is one that most people know, exercise. So physical exercise, and not just movement, but, you know, actual exercise, you know, getting our body, our blood pumping and our muscles moving. Laughter is a fantastic one for creating endorphins. So when you have a really good belly laugh and you get that feeling in your body where you feel really, really good, that's an endorphin rush. Things like eating chocolate, would you believe, will create endorphins too, which is why chocolate's so popular. But unfortunately, we're not talking about Cadbury here, or, you know, common brands where lots of sugar's added to the chocolate. We're talking about good quality chocolate. Chilies, eating chilies secrete endorphins as well, and they enhance feelings of pleasure and satisfaction. Endorphins also increase our immunity, and they modulate our appetite as well. And that's why when we have high levels of endorphin levels, we feel much better than when we don't. When we have low levels of endorphins, it can manifest in lethargy, reduced tolerance to pain, anxiety, higher levels of stress, and interestingly, a myriad of often unexplained physical disorders as well. So that's dose. And when we have healthy levels of these happy hormones in our brain and body, we have less cortisol in our body. And as a result, we feel a lot more positive and happy, which is why when we understand this and when we do things with the sole intention of inducing these hormones, and there are things we can do very intentionally to do that, our resilience is enhanced, we're stronger, and our mental health is significantly better. So we need to understand how we can actually increase these happy hormones ourselves so that we can feel more good more often. And we do that by applying 3 very simple principles of positivity. And this is the subject of next week's live. Positive thought is the first one, positive action, and positive interaction. And when we apply these basic principles of positivity, we intentionally induce dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins in our brain and in our body. And these chemicals work together to help us feeling much more positive, but really importantly, to keep our buckets empty as well. Because when our bucket's empty, we can operate from our intellectual brain. And when we're operating from our intellectual brain, we can deal with literally anything that life throws at us. So next week, in live lesson number 5, we're going to explore these 3 principles of positivity in a lot more detail. You will leave with a greater appreciation of the power of these principles. And also, I'm going to suggest a number of specific things that we can do to intentionally apply them. So please pop the date in your diary for next week. It's Monday, the 25th of May, 7:30 p.m. And if you haven't already, please turn on notifications for this group so that you're alerted when the page goes live. And as always, looking forward to seeing you then. And if for any reason you can't make it, the recording will be available very soon on here afterwards. And in the meantime, have a fantastic week. Any questions at all, just pop them in the group. And I look forward to seeing you then. Take care, guys. Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.